Have you ever stopped to wonder why you crave that next scroll, that next bite, that next hit of approval? Why the pursuit of pleasure feels less like a choice and more like a silent puppeteer pulling your strings? From the moment you were born, you were conditioned to seek comfort, to avoid pain, to mold yourself into something palatable, something good. But what if goodness is just another cage? What if every time you surrender to the warm, seductive embrace of pleasure, you're handing over another piece of your freedom without even realizing it? Sigmund Freud saw it first. The way pleasure doesn't just guide us but rules us. It whispers in the background of every decision, every compromise, every time you bite your tongue to keep the peace. It's the reason you stay in the job that drains you, the relationship that diminishes you, the habits that numb you. Pleasure isn't just a feeling, it's a tyrant dressed in velvet, promising happiness while quietly locking the doors of your mind. Think of the last time you scrolled endlessly, chasing the dopamine flicker of a new notification. Or the way you swallow your truth to avoid conflict, trading authenticity for the fleeting high of being liked. These aren't just habits, they're rituals of submission. Freud called it the pleasure principle, the unconscious drive steering us toward gratification and away from discomfort. But what happens when that principle becomes a prison? When the very thing that's supposed to bring joy instead keeps you small, obedient, asleep? This is the paradox at the heart of human existence. Pleasure, the force that makes life bearable, is also the force that keeps us from truly living. It softens the edges of reality, yes, but it also dulls the blade of our will. And beneath its seductive surface lies a deeper truth, one that Freud dared to excavate. What if the key to liberation isn't in chasing pleasure, but in understanding its grip? Freud's exploration of pleasure was never just about the surface-level thrills. It was about the invisible machinery of the human psyche, the gears and pulleys that operate beneath our awareness. At the core of his theory lies the pleasure principle, the idea that our minds are wired to seek gratification and avoid pain at all costs. But this principle doesn't act alone. It's locked in a perpetual dance with its counterpart, the reality principle, the part of us that understands delayed gratification, that tolerates discomfort for a greater reward. The tension between these two forces shapes everything: our desires, our fears, even the way we construct our identities. Consider how this plays out in the modern world. Social media platforms are engineered to exploit the pleasure principle, offering microdoses of validation that keep us coming back like lab rats pressing a lever for pellets. Romantic relationships become battlegrounds between the hunger for immediate connection and the patience required for true intimacy. Even our careers are often shaped by this duality. Do we chase the quick high of external success, or endure the grind of meaningful, long-term mastery? Freud's genius was in recognizing that pleasure isn't just a feeling. It's a compulsion, an unconscious script running in the background of our lives. But there's a darker layer here, one that Freud called the death drive, the paradoxical human tendency to self-sabotage, to return to familiar pain rather than risk the uncertainty of real change. This is where pleasure reveals its most insidious form. It doesn't just control us through reward, but through repetition. We cling to toxic relationships, addictive behaviors, and self-limiting beliefs because, on some level, their familiarity feels safer than the terrifying freedom of the unknown. Pleasure, then, isn't just about joy, it's about control. And the most frightening question Freud forces us to confront is this: who, or what, is really in charge? Imagine a kingdom where the rulers never show their faces. They govern not through force, but through desire, through the careful cultivation of hunger. The citizens believe themselves free, yet every choice they make has been quietly shaped by unseen hands. This is the allegory of pleasure's dominion over humanity, a reign so subtle that its subjects mistake their chains for garlands of flowers. Freud's theories peel back the gilded surface of human motivation to reveal the primal undercurrents that dictate our lives, much like ancient myths exposed the gods' manipulation of mortal fate. Take the story of Odysseus and the Sirens, those creatures whose song was so intoxicating that sailors would wreck their ships upon the rocks just to draw nearer. Odysseus, knowing his own weakness, orders himself tied to the mast, his ears filled with wax. But here's the twist. He leaves himself just enough freedom to hear the song's echo, to feel the torment of resisting it. This is the human condition under the pleasure principle. We are all Odysseus, simultaneously the bound prisoner and the one who chooses to be bound. The siren's call is the lure of instant gratification, the dopamine rush, the easy escape, the comfort of staying small, while the wax in our ears is the fragile buffer of rationality, the part of us that knows better but still trembles on the edge of surrender. Or consider the myth of Eros and Psyche, where love itself becomes a prison of pleasure. Psyche is forbidden to look upon Eros's true form, allowed only to experience his touch in darkness. When she finally lights the lamp and sees him, he vanishes, a metaphor for how pleasure evaporates under scrutiny, how the moment we try to grasp its essence, it slips away, leaving only addiction in its wake. Freud's concept of the libido mirrors this dynamic. Our deepest drives are both the source of our vitality and the root of our suffering, forever oscillating between ecstasy and emptiness. These myths are not mere stories. They are mirrors held up to the human soul, reflecting the eternal struggle between the hunger for pleasure and the longing for something deeper, something that pleasure, by its very nature, can never provide. The true power of Freud's revelations lies not in their theoretical elegance, but in their ability to illuminate the hidden mechanisms of our daily lives. Consider the modern workplace, where the pleasure principle manifests as the endless chase for promotions and praise, external validations that promise fulfillment but often leave us hollow. Or observe how social media platforms have become digital Skinner boxes, where every like and comment reinforces our conditioned need for approval, turning self-worth into a currency measured in algorithmic favor. Even our personal relationships frequently become arenas where unconscious drives play out, as we oscillate between craving intimacy and fearing vulnerability, between the comfort of familiarity and the terror of true connection. The reality is that pleasure's dictatorship thrives in these mundane moments, in the thousand small surrenders we make each day without realizing we've been drafted into a silent war for our own autonomy. Yet liberation begins with awareness. When we recognize how the pleasure principle operates, not as some abstract concept, but as the invisible hand shaping our choices, we gain the power to rewrite its scripts. This doesn't mean rejecting pleasure altogether, but rather developing what Freud might call psychological binocular vision, the ability to see both the immediate gratification and its long-term costs simultaneously. It's about pausing when the dessert menu arrives, not out of self-denial, but from conscious choice. It's about scrolling social media with intentionality rather than compulsion, engaging in relationships from fullness rather than neediness, pursuing goals aligned with deeper values rather than surface-level rewards. The path to freedom isn't through willpower alone, but through cultivating what psychoanalysis terms observing ego, that part of ourselves that can witness our own motivations without being enslaved by them. The transformational potential here is profound. As we become archaeologists of our own desires, excavating the buried layers of conditioning that dictate our pleasures and pains, we reclaim authorship of our lives. We begin to distinguish between pleasure that enlivens us and pleasure that enslaves us, between comfort that nurtures and comfort that numbs. This is the ultimate implication of Freud's work, that self-knowledge is the most subversive act of all, a quiet revolution against the invisible forces that would have us sleepwalk through our existence. The call is not to reject pleasure, but to relate to it with eyes wide open, to become, at last, the conscious architects of our own happiness rather than unconscious subjects of its rule. Freud's exploration of pleasure reveals humanity's great paradox. We are creatures forever torn between our biological imperatives and our transcendent potential. The pleasure principle that once ensured our survival has become, in modern society, a potential obstacle to our flourishing. Yet within this tension lies our greatest opportunity, the chance to transform our relationship with pleasure from one of blind obedience to conscious navigation. This is the journey from being controlled by our desires to understanding them, from being passengers in our lives to becoming pilots. The invitation is not to asceticism, but to awareness, not to reject pleasure, but to engage with it in a way that serves our deepest humanity rather than diminishes it. The choice, as always, is ours. Will we remain pleasure's subjects, or become its masters?